Halo Infinite is a dead game. We all know this, but it didn't die of old age or even natural causes. It was murdered. This is nothing new. This is probably the 1000th video on the platform to make this claim, and I'm sure it won't be the last. Few have been spared the tale of Microsoft 343 and their abusive mismanagement of Halo's 7th installment. The story far fewer people have heard, though, is how the speedrunning scene for Halo Infinite suffered a very similar fate to the multiplayer experience. For a brief time, Halo Infinite was the #1 speedrunning sensation. People from all over the gaming sphere came around to try their hand at the open world Halo speedrun. Never have I seen such a plethora of excited nerds spending hours upon hours in voice chat, strategizing, theorizing, and practicing. This new and, although deeply flawed, speedrunning titan. Unfortunately, this huge bustling community full of exploration and innovation over time became a wasteland. It wasn't a quick death, there was no smoking gun, no shooter on the hill, but just like Halo Infinite itself, it was a death by 1,000 paper cuts. First was the game's design itself, eating its own speedrun alive. While the game's core mechanics like the grapple hook and movement led to some amazing gameplay moments, the open world nature of the game led it to quickly be a 30-minute speedrun. While not in and of itself a problem, the meta that emerged quickly became one that was boring, toxic, and exceedingly unfun for the majority of players. Not only that, but due to the game's always online nature and its campaign having the same launcher as the multiplayer, countless patches and firewalls were put up that stopped speedrunners in their tracks. At first, it was just a few glitches and tricks that were removed. While this is very demoralizing and bad for speedruns accessibility, this is nothing out of the ordinary. New strategies could be invented, and most of the time, speedrunning communities choose to play on early versions of the game anyways. Unfortunately though, the fact that the game was always online ended up having dire consequences for the speedrunning community. Console players were left without the ability to downpatch, making it useless to try to compete in the speedrun. On PC, downpatching was for a time feasible. Playing on the game's launch patch was an option, as cumbersome as the process was to downpatch it. But when a later update came out, having a new piece of tech that saved a huge amount of time in the speedrun, even that eventually became a non-option. Halo Infinite was stuck in a speedrun purgatory. It is unknown if this was even done on purpose, but a server-side update pushed to the game's newsfeed in the main menu would cause the game to crash whenever it tried to put the newsfeed into the old UI. Meaning that even if you downpatched, if your PC was connected to the internet, the game would just crash when exiting the campaign and returning to the main menu. We tried to resolve this. Firewall protection seemed to be a feasible solution, but the game would stall for several seconds on each quitout and sometimes crash when attempting to connect to the servers. Not an ideal solution for a speedrun that quits out to the main menu several times throughout the run. The other option was to play completely offline. You see, Halo Infinite had a kernel-level internet check. That means that if your computer had access to the internet at all when you launched the game, even if the application had no access to it itself, then it would run the server-side check that crashed your game. This meant that the only available option to play on older versions of the game was to play completely disconnected to the internet, then launch the game and reconnect afterwards. This doesn't sound so bad, but considering the game has only 4 save slots, and to refill your pre-made saves you had to close the game, that would mean every 4 resets you would have to disconnect from the internet. And every single time you quit out to the main menu, there was a chance that your game would crash, causing you to have to disconnect from the internet again to get back into your run. Then later in an update, the downpatch version of the game would hang on the title screen, never making it to the main menu. This is because newer save files would end up breaking the old version of the game. To solve this, you need to manually back up and rename your current downpatch game and save folders when launching through Steam, a tedious task that added another straw to the camel's back. This was the final blow to most of Halo Infinite's speedrunning community. Sure, having a downpatch is a pain, and because of it, you'll essentially lose out on any console speedrunners. But if that's where it had ended, it could have been recoverable. Losing the ability to stream your speedruns, however, totally kills any and all motivation for most players. Speedrunning is a highly social hobby. Sharing runs, talking and testing strategies, as well as competing with one another in real time, is 90% of the appeal of speedrunning for most people. At the time, it looked like this was the end for Halo Infinite. With its player base rapidly falling off a cliff and the speedrunning scene following suit, the leaderboard quickly dried up. Any percent would receive only 5 new runners in the years 2023 and 2024 combined. and almost no old runners would even attempt to improve their times in these years. It's safe to say that Halo Infinite speedrunning was dead. This tale fortunately has a happy ending. Thanks to the efforts of the speedrunning community, Halo Infinite speedrun has been rising from the ashes to become something truly awesome. Through modding, the creation of new categories, tools, and resources, it seems like Halo Infinite speedrunning is finally back. In perfect sync with these changing winds, the game's biggest achievement has finally been accomplished: a new world record breaking the game's final hour barrier. Join me as I break down the speedrun piece by piece, explaining the intricacies of each skip and glitch, while also sharing the story of what made it all possible. This is the story of how DICE saved Halo Infinite in under 1 hour. This is a speedrun of Halo Infinite, all missions easy in 59:41 performed by DICE. That means he is playing on the easy difficulty and he is not allowed to skip any of the main story missions. I'll elaborate more on that last part later. The game starts when he's selecting a new game in the campaign screen, but the timing doesn't start just yet. In order for you to understand what is going on in the story, since no one finished Halo 5, the game starts off with a few cutscenes. Despite this, most of the cool plot relevant things happen off screen anyways. Master Chief is on a big old spaceship, and despite his handy new grappling hook, he promptly gets his ass handed to him and yeeted off into space by a brute named Atriox. The crew is mostly dead, and the new faction that is basically the Covenant but red, called the Banish, claim their kill over the legendary Master Chief. We are then greeted by Fernando Esparza, the pilot of Echo 216, who has been held up in this Pelican for God knows how long, staring at holograms of his waifu. Wake up! Waifu has merch now! Go buy it before Christmas! He runs into Master Chief and boots him back up after blowing into the cartridge like we all used to back in the day. Oh god, I'm so old, please help. This is where the speedrun would pick up with the start of the first mission, Warship Gabraaken. Before we get into the speedrun proper though, I want to take a second to explain the game's structure first, since it's a bit esoteric. And it'll become exceedingly important when trying to understand the appeal of this category specifically. Halo Infinite is broken up into 16 levels. The first 3 are linear introduction levels, and then the player is introduced to the open world. The open world is only semi-open, however. There are several islands on the map separated by gaps in ecology. These gaps are easy to jump across, but the game has constructed elastic barriers between each island. These barriers grab you and hold you and then drag you down to the bottom of the map where you die. If you manage to get past one of these barriers or find a hole, however, if that area is not unlocked yet, you'll receive a return to combat timer. After this timer ends, you will instantly die. In order to unlock the other parts of the ring, the player must progress through the 16 campaign levels to the extent that they unlock new areas of the story. After completing the tower, the second major location is unlocked. Then after Conservatory, another is unlocked, and then at the start of Pelican Down, the third is unlocked. Next is the second to last island unlocked during the sequence, and finally the last area being unlocked upon completion of the repository. The final 3 missions are then no longer in the open world and are once again on rails. At the very start of the first mission before the run even starts, we're greeted by a basic tutorial reminiscent of Halo CE. This, in the community, is called Lights, and it was one of the main things that really started to wear down the runners upon release. Having to do a slow 80-second long tutorial at the start of every run was a huge drag, and for some, it killed a lot of their ambition to grind for better times. Thankfully, the community eventually got together and decided to start the run's official timing after the tutorial ends, when you start the first mission proper on Warship Gabraaken, allowing PC players to load a save that starts the game after the tutorial. This was the first piece of the puzzle when it came to reviving Halo Infinite speedrunning. With my blabbering and backstory about lore out of the way, DICE's run officially starts now. With the game starting proper at Warship Gabraaken, we finally take control of Master Chief from the books. Armed with this new grappling hook, the man can do just about anything. DICE flies around the corner like Spider-Man, jumping, swinging, and sliding through the level with ease. The first door is locked behind a 3-kill quota, so he quickly 1-digs 2 grunts and then mows down the last one. This opens the door so he can progress further into the level. You probably have noticed that he slides after he grapples quite often. This is because when you grapple hook, you gain a lot of momentum. This momentum can be maintained to some extent by sliding right afterwards. Sprinting, then grappling, then sliding is the fastest way to move at this point in the game. However, it's all on a cycle. The grapple hook takes some time to recharge, and there are opportune times that you want to take advantage of this massive increase in movement speed and agility. The grapples are all routed to be done in the same places every run, maximizing their utility. Dice arrives at the elevator where he has to wait for it to come down. Inside is two brutes. Dice grabs a plasma coil and sets it next to the door. Coils in Halo Infinite can be grappled, grabbed, thrown, and set down. This new addition adds tons to the sandbox, allowing for many interesting setups and interactions in the gameplay. He shoots the first one once to put it near the explosion state, then holds the second one until the door opens where he yeets it at the two brutes, blowing them away like it's Halo 2. He then rides the elevator while maintaining eye contact with your mom for as long as possible before moving on. This is where the first real trick of the run starts. Gabraaken as a level has you follow a series of hallways until you arrive at this big arena, where Master Chief then sets the ship to self-destruct by asking it very nicely to do so. Then you go through a new exit around the corner and end up in the same room you started in, but now with the small difference of the ship exploding around you. Very early on in the game's speedrun development, it was found that you can simply punch the door that you normally backtrack through 3 times. This causes it to open from the wrong direction. Now you're in the backtrack tunnel early and none of the lighting or enemies have spawned in. If you follow it all the way to the arena, you hit the trigger that causes the ship to start exploding. This skips an entire multi-wave fight and a few cutscenes. After a few playthroughs, the Master Chief makes the ship explode out of sheer anxiety and doesn't even need to apply force. With the ship now exploding, Dice can now backtrack to the elevator shaft and proceed to the end of the mission. This skip saves several minutes, but no one's really sure exactly how much time it saves because it was found so close to the release of the game that very few runs were ever done without it. On the way through, Dice grabs the battle rifle for later. Just before the exit, he also grabs a fusion coil, which prevents him from sprinting or sliding, but it will be worth the time loss, I assure you. Finally, at the mission's finale, Dice takes his fusion friend and places him into the doorframe of this large hangar. He then performs some of the coolest speedrun tech in all of Halo, a fusion coil launch. This interesting interaction happens because Dice is pulling the fusion coil into his own hitbox. When you grapple a fusion coil, the grapple grabs the center of the coil, not the closest edge to the actual grapple point. Because of this, if you stand on the long end of the fusion coil and grapple it to you, half of the fusion coil will be pushed into the player's hitbox. For a brief moment, the game's collision system is fighting itself, rapidly trying to push the coil out of Master Chief's body while simultaneously pulling it towards him so he can pick it up. This creates a ton of velocity as the fusion coil takes priority over Master Chief and sends him flying. In this specific instance, Dice is lining up on a door frame and is redirecting off at the slanted edge of the door's frame. This allows him to fly horizontally across the gap instead of vertically into the ceiling. This trick is used many times in the run, but is incredibly difficult. The way you pull the fusion coil into you affects what sort of velocity and direction you're going to get. Getting the intended speed and direction requires a precise setup and feel. Jumping before grappling helps get more speed, and lining it up against a wall helps with increasing consistency of direction. But even then, it requires a lot of practice and a little bit of luck. Dice simply slides his way to the end of the level where there's a 1 minute and 53 second unskippable cutscene that ends Warship Gabraaken. Having successfully fucked shit up, Master Chief is just like me for real and contacts no one, not a single soul, hoping that he could just float around in space forever and sleep, until he is rudely interrupted by his alarm clock Echo 216 and has to go back to war. Fernando really wants to go home, but Chief isn't done here yet. He wants to track down a bigger weapon so he can take out the rest of the bandage before they shoot the Halo ring. Even though the Halo ring is broken, so they can't shoot it. Frankly, Chief doesn't have much justification for doing what he is doing, but are you going to tell this 7-foot Tin Man space doom guy no? Foundation is the level where grapple, timing, and placement is the most important. Halo Infinite has an RPG-style leveling system for a handful of its abilities, most notably the grapple hook. By finding Spartan cores, Master Chief can give himself new abilities and upgrade old ones. Upgrading the grapple hook's recovery speed is at the top of the list, but the first Spartan cores are at the outpost of the 3rd mission. So all of the grapples in Foundation and Warship are very high commitment. They better be good because it takes about 4 seconds to get your grapple hook back. If you're over a chasm, you're just dead.
That was some movement.
Before long, we have our first death-defying stunt, as Dice grabs a hard light coil and sets it up against this curb so he can use it to launch himself vertically. This allows him to grapple to the door he is supposed to get to later on in the level. This skips going around a few hallways and a lot of enemies that lead to a grav lift with some lore. This coil launch is really hard to do fast, because if you get too much speed, you'll hit the ceiling, and you can redirect, sending you flying in the wrong direction into your death. Once Dice lands after the coil launch, a timer starts.
Pretty shitty still.
This timer starts the cycling of a group of pillars called Silexes a few rooms down. These spin around a big circle and intermittently block a bridge that Dice will be running on. If he has good movement, he can guarantee that none of the Silexes will be in his way. Once past them, Dice activates a cutscene where Master Chief finds his weapon. The weapon in this instance is, well, the weapon, a copy of Cortana. The voice inside John Halo hears head. The old voice in his head went insane and became Space Hitler, so she was killed off screen and replaced with new Cortana. Afterwards is an auto-scroller that's 1 minute and 18 seconds long. A great time to check Twitter or something. This is followed shortly after with a big gap skip. Halo Infinite has a lot of these. It feels almost like the developers designed the levels without the grapple hook in mind and then added it in later.
You know, the grapple was something that we added on later, so we had to figure out how to, you know, how to change the scripting on everything so it doesn't require you to do that step that he just totally circumvented with the grapple hook.
So many sections can simply be skipped by grapple hooking across a gap. I won't mention them all for time's sake, but when they happen, I'll add this icon on screen. Next, there is this open section that Dice is in now. I apologize for not being able to name every room efficiently. You will quickly see that many rooms look exactly the same, so that becomes difficult very quickly. But anyways, normally the player is supposed to activate some light bridges that will spawn in banished enemies. Once killed, you can then activate more light bridges. But with some good movement, you can simply grapple a hook over the room, skipping both fights. After clearing this room, Dice ends up at an elevator, which turns out is faster to simply grapple hook up instead of activating and then riding up. Mr. Halo, joined now by several voices in his head, including Dice, stumbles upon a dead Spartan body that was apparently killed by a super energy sword. Sick. Anyways, Chief yoinks for Spartan Core and it upgrades his shields. This allows for future upgrades to the shield to make them take heavier hits before needing to be replenished. The very next room is our first pure combat clear. In order to progress, Dice needs to massacre a ton of grunts and jackals. The best way to do this is to pick them off as he walks towards the end of the room, where they'll then all converge on him. This is where the battle rifle he picked up on Warship will come in handy. Headshots instant kill both grunts and jackals, but jackals have a shield that's in the way. You must first remove the shield by shooting them in the hand or by grappling it before you can get a headshot. By standing at the end of the room, the enemies that are all left funnel to him through two pathways, making clearing them up really fast.
We need to call
Wow.
the elevator.
That actually went pretty
He then slides around a corner and grabs a power seed. These little guys are used to power up things like doors and elevators, and he needs it to activate the final elevator, which spawns the game's first boss. You can't sprint or slide with a seed in your hand, so Dice throws his seed all across the map. Wait, what?
off. Oh my god.
For 6 months, surrounded by them.
That would have been
What's to say they
funny.
talk a lot.
Once he puts his seed inside, the first boss spawns in along with 2 jackals. Before he can progress up the elevator, all 3 must be killed. Dice swaps out his sidekick for a needler, as the super combined effect it has when hitting many shots on a target is very useful for this boss. When the boss spawns in, he first starts by grapple hooking him so that he stops him from jumping around and using his jetpack. From there, Dice sticks him twice with 2 sticky grenades. This removes the entirety of his shields, leaving him open to super combines and spike grenades, killing him nearly instantly. Dice then uses the battle rifle to finish off the jackals and goes up the elevator in record time. Outpost is the last level before you reach the open world, but it already leans way into the sandbox environment of Halo. It has many which ways you can approach the combat, but only one way that you could start the level. After riding the elevator, Dice arrives at his first real Spartan Core. He won't upgrade his grapple just yet though. On the way through the room before getting outside, he has to kill a few grunts and grab some shot grenades. These are new. This next section is where things open up a bit. The goal is to kill all of the enemies quickly so that Echo 216 can regroup with John Halo, but not every enemy is required. The landing pad that you see as you leave the room needs to be cleared out, as well as some of the enemies on the ramp around the corner, as well as all the enemies in the dropship that's going to start flying over after you cross a certain point in the level. Dice runs to the left immediately, swinging around a corner where he grabs a rocket launcher and another Spartan core. He then grapples up to the landing pad as he throws some shock grenades to stun the enemies. Shock grenades remove shields slowly and, more importantly, stun enemies in place, allowing him to use rockets to kill groups of them quickly. He then runs across towards this giant crashed ship with the big anti-aircraft guns sticking out of the top. These guns have a funny story attached to them. There are a few buttons that are scattered around the level, and as an Easter egg, if you press them all, they will fire, and the missiles will come down from the sky and land on the platform. One might think that this Easter egg would be a fast way of clearing up the enemies on the landing pad, but DICE is going to do you one better. By grappling up to the gun, he can be there just in time to see the dropship flying by. He shoots 2 rockets, leading them so they land in its side, and then he does something a bit unexpected. He looks at the tip of the barrel of the Easter egg and picks up the gun. Yeah, you heard me right, he picks up the Easter egg. DICE is now a human cannon that shoots tank bullets from his feet. He uses this newfound power to blow up the dropship before its enemies can even leave it, instantly killing them all. This is doubly fast because the dropship normally has to fly into the distance and despawn before the combat encounter is considered over. But because he blows it up, he just does not have to wait for that to happen anymore. Let's go back and explain this gun first before we head to the rest of the level. This is the tank gun. Basically, when the developers add a gun to a vehicle in Halo, they need to make it a gun first. One that you could, in theory, use as a player. But then you attach it to the use of a vehicle, in this case, the Easter egg. Normally, there is a flag that is set on these weapons, a flag that prevents the player from being able to pick them up. The devs in this instance simply forgot to make that flag active for this Easter egg. This would forever change the trajectory of this game's speedrun, and quite frankly, it would be a sign of things to come. DICE uses this thing to clean up the rest of the enemies and grapple hook over to this button, where after activating it, an unskippable cutscene plays. This is slow, so DICE actually quits out to the main menu as the cutscene starts. You might notice something on this quit out though. This is because DICE is playing on a downpatch version of the game. As I said before, nearly all speedrun tech in this game was removed in updates released by 343. For a long time, players were unable to play on downpatch versions because of this server-side check on the news feed in the main menu that would cause the game to crash if you were connected to the internet and playing on an old version. DICE and many other people, however, managed to come up with a way to circumvent this by altering the game's code. It took 3 years and a ton of theory crafting and tinkering, and I won't get into the details, but he essentially removed the news feed's ability to check back in with the server, thus removing the crash. I'm going to talk about a lot of developments throughout the video that helped revive Halo Infinite speedrunning, but this is single-handedly the most important one. Being able to stream your speedruns is a massive advantage, both to the enjoyment of the run and your ability to play well. For those who may not know, streaming culture and speedrunning are one and the same. I often get comments asking me how I can play for thousands of hours, games that many people can never touch again after just one playthrough. And the reason is streaming. Speedrunning is a highly social hobby. Speedrunning groups for games or series are like a club full of members that also share the same passion and drive for exploration and self-improvement that you do. Not to mention the games themselves. This leads to endless discussions on Discord about potential routing and speedrun strategies, but most of the talking goes on during live streams. Sure, your average speedrunner won't have hundreds of viewers cheering them on, but you can guarantee that if you start speedrunning a game, that game's community will quickly find you and help you out, give you tips on strategies, and answer any questions you may have. Speedrunning community's community involvement happens nearly exclusively in the Discord and in Twitch chat. Taking away the speedrunner's ability to stream their runs creates a huge barrier for most people. It completely removes the social element, leaving only the grind. Grinding is fun. It's fun to see yourself improve and get better, but doing that all alone is very challenging. It's easy to get discouraged and bored when you're all alone in a dark room, grinding out your speedrun attempts. But when you stream them, it's much more of a community-oriented thing. DICE saved Halo Infinite's ability to stream the speedrun, and that alone has brought back many people into the mix. But because of the way he had to do it, the game will try and fail to reconnect to the servers every time we go back to the main menu. This is only a mild inconvenience though, it just has this little pop-up. Once back into the game though, the cutscene is skipped, letting you end the level by flying away with Echo 216. This ends Outpost, and the last level before the game becomes truly open world. Well, as open world as Halo Infinite gets.
Nice.
Chief gets a distress call from some Marines on the ring nearby and decides to go help. The game wants you to help the Marines and save the day, but just like every other Halo speedrun, we hate Marines, and killing them saves time. Well, in this instance, it's not quite killing them as they're already dead. This is essentially a tutorial level for the open world. FOB Golf. Forward Operating Base. There are many of these structures throughout the ring, and defeating the banished that hold them often saves Marines and will add the base to your list of fast travel locations. These bases can also be used to call in reinforcement and, most importantly, vehicles. Of course, this would be completely optional in a speedrun, but unfortunately, this first one isn't, as it functions as that tutorial, as I said. DICE needs something from it anyways, though, so it's not a big deal. He rains a little bit of hellfire from above with his tank gun and quickly clears the remaining enemies. Claiming the base comes with a long, unskippable cutscene that shows you how to use the map, but we don't know how to read, so that's not useful information to us. DICE grabs a plasma coil and places it adjacent to the button. Plasma coils burn hot fire after they explode that could kill you over time. You can't quit out to the main menu during the cutscene, but you can shoot the plasma coil and then start the cutscene. Once far enough into the cutscene, you can hit a trigger that assigns the base to you and registers the level as completed. Shortly after hitting this trigger, DICE dies to the fire, unlocking his ability to pause the game. He then quits to the main menu and jumps back in the game, thus skipping the cutscene. Once back in the game, FOB Golf is now captured. The Chief now moves onward to his next goal, the tower in the distance. He hears a radio call from an elite there that sounds menacing, so he wants to go there next. But it's kind of far away, so we call a cab. DICE calls in a mongoose to drive over to the tower, or so you would think. Instead, when he calls the mongoose, it's getting airdropped in by a Pelican. DICE grapples up to this tree and lands on top of the Pelican, where he then gets inside of it as if he's going to drive it. Unfortunately, you can't just fly the Pelican off into the sunset. It won't let you do any inputs. It's just a scripted Pelican that drops off the mongoose. It will soon fly up into the sky and crush Chief against the skybox if DICE doesn't get out of it. The developers once again forgot to remove the flag this time, but on the vehicle, that says you can or can't drive it. Because it's on a scripted flight though, all you could do is sit in the driver's seat. That is until DICE quits out to the main menu and loads back in. This breaks the scripting for the Pelican leaving, and it is now on the ground, sad and alone. But no need to fear, Pelican, DICE is here. And he can actually drive this thing. It controls much the same as a Hornet, but moves much, much faster. Flying in a diagonal is really fast, and you can clear most of the open world in no time at all. Now that DICE has free reign and his dope ride, he has a bit of a shopping list. He needs 4 more Spartan cores and a duelist energy sword that increases his movement speed and jump height. He promptly flies at a 45-degree angle over to Ransom Keep, where he grabs a Spartan core. Then a bit forward towards Okro Vagadoon, where he grabs an energy sword. He then makes 2 more small pit stops on the way to the tower, leaving him with only 1 Spartan core left to collect. The tower is the next main story mission. Beating it unlocks a whole new part of the open world. The mission, however, starts when you get within a certain range of the tower automatically. Chadlock, the absolute Chad of an elite that guards this place, has taken a Spartan hostage and Chief wants to save him. Like many a villain in a video game though, he has a monologue that he has to finish first. The gravity lift that unlocks the way to the tower won't start until his dialogue is over. DICE speeds this up by flying into the trigger and overlapping the weapons dialogue with Chadlock's. This causes it so that when the weapons dialogue ends, it also ends Chadlock's, skipping most of the monologue. Normally, you would then go find and turn on the power, and then activate the gravity lift so you can go into the tower. But this is slow, so DICE parks his Pelican up here for later and then jumps down to grab his last Spartan core. He then uses this to upgrade the grapple hook 3 times. The first upgrade makes it so that when you grapple an enemy, they are stunned for a brief period of time. But the second upgrade is much more important. It increases the recovery speed of the grapple hook, making its cycles way faster. The third upgrade, however, is even more interesting than that, and it does not bode well for the game's collision. The ground pound is the third upgrade, and DICE quickly will demonstrate why it is taken in the speedrun. Yeah, the ground pound upgrade has some interesting applications to say the least. When doing a ground pound, Master Chief's animations will change depending on what angle he has to the collision that he slams into. If he slams into a vertical object near the floor, his feet will clip through the floor. Then the game will attempt to push you out of the floor. This will often happen in a direction that is not exactly a part of the intended play space, however. This is most effective when there is a downward slope above flat ground, where the slope will push you through the floor. Sometimes this can be used to go through the ceiling as well. Its main limitation though is that it can't push you through horizontal walls. Now inside the walls, just like the voices in Chief's head, DICE can go to where the Spartan signal is coming from and collect its threat detector. Unfortunately, it seems that the boss will not spawn in unless you pick up this item, so we're just going to have to watch this 45-second cutscene. DICE quickly goes back out of bounds though, and climbs up to the top of the tower where he has to wait for a moment above these stairs. If he goes too fast here, he will be soft locked. Once the door shines yellow though, he is clear to use it from out of bounds, which teleports him back into the arena. This arrives him right in the boss fight with Chadlock, and it turns out he's not so much of a Chad after all, as he hides with his invisibility cloak thinking he's Harry Potter or some shit. Fortunately, DICE has a pocket tank, so he can just blast him once nearby these shock barrels to stun him. Then he hits him 3 times with the energy sword to kill him quickly. This is actually a bit unlucky. Chadlock moved, causing the tank gun shot not to hit him for full damage. This made DICE hit him 3 times with the energy sword instead of just twice. This is a big deal because the sword only gives a speed boost as long as it has ammo in it, and you only get 1 throughout the game. Thusly, the ammo is routed very particularly. Thus completes the tower and starts the dig site. Dig site's where I'd like to make a bit of a tangent, as this is where the story takes a turn. Due to Halo Infinite's open world nature, it was bound to have a completely broken speedrun. And it sure does, but there is such a thing as too broken. While speedrunning is about going fast and completing the game, it's also about having fun and promoting personal growth. Speedrunning though is much like an omnipresent hand controlling all. No matter what your overall philosophy is, at the end of the day, beating the game quickly is still the main goal. So under the wrong circumstances, speed could take precedence over fun. Unfortunately, the way that things plan out, it's not always the fastest strategy that is the most fun. It is fun to figure out what the most fast strategy is, but the actual execution of it isn't always the most appealing. This is a speedrun of the all missions category. The astute among you might recognize that is definitely not any percent. That's because, well, any percent kinda sucks. In traditional Halo speedrunning, the game is segmented by levels, which absolutely have no way to sequence break them skipping missions. But very quickly after Halo Infinite's release, a YouTube commenter named Dallas Roach left a comment on Hark the Shark's video, saying he had found a glitch that made him invincible during the dig site. This was huge, because the speedrunning community had received a tip that if you could get to the area where the mission The Road, the third to last mission was, that you could trigger the mission to start and sequence break all the way from dig site to The Road. But because of the return to combat barriers, it was impossible to get there. Until now. The speedrun then became about doing the early game as fast as possible to get here. So you could get the invincibility by jumping into this laser, and then using that to traverse into the out of bounds area where you would get a flying vehicle and just fly to The Road, skipping 7 of the game's levels. This made the run about only 30 minutes long, and over half of the run's playtime was the first 3 missions. Eventually it was found out that you can even use the Pelican to just force your way through the elastic barriers, making getting a flying vehicle trivial as well. This created a speedrun that was mostly the least fun levels of the run, and had very little of tech and tricks that made the game cool. The tricks simply skipped too much of the game and neutered any opportunities to show off cool tech. What was once cool movement and out of bounds tricks was now holding WA in a Pelican. This led many people to completely drop Halo Infinite as a speedrun, as especially the Halo speedrunning community did not want this type of run in their speedrun. That's not to say that it didn't have its own merits, and it's cool in its own right, but it's not exactly what the community wanted. The run would change one more time with the discovery of an even more broken way of getting to The Road, a piece of tech called lunge warping or ghost ghosting. Essentially, if you're mid-punch or melee lunge towards an enemy and you get in a vehicle at the same time, the game freaks out. How the game deals with exception situations like this where it loses the player is it stores the center point of the map at 0-0, and it teleports the player to this location when they're lost. This works as a failsafe to stop the game-breaking bugs from ruining your playthrough. However, when you are getting into a vehicle and this happens, it gets doubly confused. It essentially teleports the vehicle to 0-0 and faces it north, but your location is determined by the pitch, roll, and direction of the vehicle when you teleported. This transforms the data according to where you would be if the vehicle was at 0-0. This visualizer tool that Burnt made gives a good visual of how this works exactly. The cursor points to where the ghosting is done, and the yellow dots are the potential locations that you could teleport to. The vehicle itself doesn't actually get teleported to 0-0 though, it stays where it is, but the player's hitbox does get teleported, meaning you could hit triggers really far away like this. This is then used in the any % speedrun to completely skip FOB Golf and the tower, and land to a closer location where you can then do another ghost to land at the road. The current any % speedrun world record is a 25:29 by Sasquatch Sensei, and while it's a really cool run, ultimately the meta for any % was just not appealing to the majority of speedrunners. It turned so many runners off the game, in fact, that the game ended up essentially dead. The leaderboard would receive only one submission that used this route in all of 2024. Before that, the last submission was in July of 2023, one of only 2 submissions that year. That's 3 submissions in 2 years. This is why the category being run today is all missions. Shortly after the ghosting meta was found, Waifu would seek to create a category that would fill the void that traditional Halo speedrunners had when it came to speedrunning Halo Infinite. After several days of writing up rules and discussing it with a few other runners, he proposed the all missions category. This category would require the players to start every mission in the game in order, while completing the game as fast as possible. This allowed for a high amount of creativity when completing a level, similar to any %, but did not allow players to perform any level skipping sequence breaks. Unfortunately, as well received as the category was, it was too late. The game had already died out, and while the category did officially get added to the Halo Runs leaderboard, it was not the main category, and only got a total of 3 runners in its first year: Waifu, LTQ, and Treyful. They did their best to optimize the category, bringing it down to a 1:16:58. Waifu would even go on to run the game at Summer Games Done Quick 2022 with the all missions category, this time with the caveat of not using the tank gun either. The groundwork was being laid out, but unfortunately it was too little too late. Speedrunners weren't the only ones who didn't like the speedrun meta, but we won't get into that just yet. Back to all missions though, you can see right after you kill Chadlock and free the tower, the bridge opens up that allows you to get to the second island. Dice quickly grabs his Pelican and diagonal flies to the dig site, where he's then going to be skipping the entire mission. In all missions, you only need to start each mission. This allows for a high level of creativity when it comes to ending the mission. Normally, you're supposed to start a laser and then start the boss fight, which then allows you to go into the dungeon of the Conservatory. The only thing that's really stopping you from going down there though is the laser. Dice navigates around this easily by stopping just shy of the dig site and grabbing another Spartan core. Then, using this portable shield on the ground, he ground pound clips through the floor. This time he's in the overworld, so he's literally under the map. Thankfully, with the grapple hook upgraded, he doesn't have to worry about falling to his death anymore. Arriving at the dig site starts the mission and meets the conditions for the all missions category. The only thing left to do is clip back and bounce through the store frame and start the next mission, Conservatory. Conservatory is going to be our first dungeon mission since we got ground pound, so it's going to look very different than the first 2. The goal here is simple: get to the other end of the Conservatory and ride the elevator out of it. The fastest path is always a straight line, and with the ground pound, Dice can easily go out of bounds and make some better pathing. The very next room has an upgrade in it, which is the drop shield. The player can put this thing down at any time, and it's actually very useful to create new setups for ground pound clipping through almost every floor. The downside is it's attached to an almost minute-long unskippable cutscene. Very recently, this was actually ratted out by Alice, as all of the clips that require the drop shield have had alternate versions discovered that don't require it, cutting out this cutscene from the run. Navigating around it does get a bit tricky, however. The way Dice gets out of bounds here is a double ground pound clip. The first ground pound gets him stuck inside some invisible geometry. After nudging around a bit, he can then do a second ground pound to free himself completely. Once out of bounds though, there is a bit of a complication. Interior level out of bounds and open world out of bounds are very different. Open world out of bounds allows you to go anywhere you want and do nearly anything. It's as if you were in bounds, just on the wrong side of a wall. That makes sense, but interior out of bounds is much more complicated. Interior out of bounds is much more restrictive because the game assumes much more of the player. There is only one way to approach the play space, and therefore it should be impossible to, let's say, be on top of the geometry. Because of this, the game has what are called BSP loading areas. A BSP is a file format for 3D objects and essentially is a grouping of 3D models for an entire area. In interior levels, these are generally rooms. So the first room is, for example, one BSP. In Halo Infinite, each interior BSP has its own play space, not allowing the player to extend outside of it. If they do, they will instantly die, or get frozen in space unable to move, making your only course of action quitting to the main menu to reload from your last checkpoint. Each and every BSP has its own rules for how big the play space is. This means that some rooms, if you go even a little bit above them, you'll instantly die, and others you can jump around all day on top of them and be just fine. It really depends on the room. The catch is that only one BSP loading space can be active at a time, and in order for switch from one to the other, you must come into contact with the collision of that area. And no, the grapple hook doesn't count. DICE has memorized the boundaries of each of these BSP load zones and is carefully navigating around them while trying to have optimum movement atop the level. Some BSP's load zones are just too narrow to traverse out of bounds, especially across the doorways. So DICE goes back in bounds to grab this power seed and use it to half open this door. There is another seed in this room that he could use to open the door all the way, but instead he's going to grab another plasma coil and introduce some new tech. This is called a coil pinch. Shortly after release, an update was added to the game that accidentally added a new mechanic. If you grapple objects, they become heavy until you grapple something else. You can no longer push them, and they are basically immovable objects at this point. This can be used to our advantage, as DICE will show here. He makes the coil heavy by grappling it, and then he lines up in front of the door and drops the coil straight up. He then moves in front of the coil and has it land on top of him at an angle. This causes the coil that is still heavy to push Master Chief into the wall and through the door. Since the coil has become heavy, it no longer cares about Chief and will push him out of the way instead of the normal interaction, which is the other way around. This was a huge discovery. While ground pound clips are fantastic for going through ceilings and the floor, coil pinches are perfect for going through horizontal walls, as you will see here once again. After activating the button, a window will appear that teases an arena. You'll make it to this arena after a few minutes of fighting through a windy hallway normally. The BSP load zones in these hallways are super tight, and doing this section out of bounds is just a no-go. But because DICE has a heavy coil, he can stand up against the glass and drop the coil on his head, pushing him through, skipping right to the arena. Normally, this is where an enemy would appear that Chief would then take on before a door opens and you can progress. There's also a cutscene here where Chief would find out that Cortana was trying to free something called the Endless before she was killed off screen. Next up, you guessed it, DICE will just ground pound clip through this door. This one is a bit scary because there's no collision right under the door, and the BSP load is very close to the floor. So DICE double ground pound clips and holds left to land on the interior side of the floor. This allows him to get a lineup where he can grapple through to the next BSP load zone. One more grapple around a corner and a ground pound clip back in bounds, and DICE finds himself the thruster upgrade. Thruster gives a short speed boost in the direction you were holding. It's not immediately useful and can be skipped, but it pays for itself later on, I promise. All that's left to do is ride the elevator up, but there are two big problems in the way. Brute chieftains with really strong shields.
Chief, that platform. We're too late.
And they're dead. DICE then grapples up to meet the elevator on its way down and starts it going back up early.
Did they kill Spartan Sorrel?
Negative. His killers are still out.
Not bad.
This elevator, it's taking us back to the surface.
They just didn't want to shoot at me, which was...
Why come all the way down here?
He then grabs a couple of shock nades on the way up and stands at the very top of the elevator so he can hit the trigger to end the level as early as possible.
No idea.
After riding the elevator to the top, Chief is greeted by a new alien, the Harbinger. She's kind of freaky. She looked like the Locust Queen from Gears of War, but if she was covered in neon and could fly. She's basically saying the same thing as Cortana. She wants to free the Endless, which are supposed to be worse than the Flood. Her plan is to repair the ring in order to be able to free the Endless. Don't ask how that works. Chief gets his ass beat and then the Spire level starts. Upon starting Spire, a new area of the open world is unlocked, one that we will never return to again. DICE grabs the Warthog and uses it to drive to the Spire. This is one of the very few instances where driving a vehicle is actually faster than just running with the Duelist Sword. Once at the bottom of the Spire, DICE takes care of a few hunters before riding the grav lift inside. This is where DICE starts using the thruster. He upgrades it so he can thrust 2 times before it needs to recharge while waiting for the gravity lift. The map and upgrade menu don't pause the game, so this is no time loss as he upgrades while riding the lift. The thruster will from now on be used in some niche scenarios where you're going to be between grapples and just want a small boost in speed, like right here. Chief is now introduced to Adjusted Resolution, the backup monitor of the Spire, who is pretty pissed that someone killed the original. It was the Harbinger, and she's using the Spires to create resources that she could use to then repair the ring. Chief convinces Adjusted Resolution that it wasn't them, and he listens, leading the crew up to his crib. Dice, impatiently waiting for the Guilty Spark clone to open doors, grapples into him, pushing him forward. This speeds up the waiting a little bit. After Dice rides the elevator, Chief tells the weapon to shut down the facility, and Sparky does not like that, so he attacks. This is yet another boss fight, and the tank gun really shines here. The boss has several phases of invincibility. Each time you break one of his 4 arms, he allows you to hit his core briefly, but then he gets invincibility for a brief time afterwards. By throwing a sticky grenade in place that hits all 4 arms, Dice can shoot the tank gun at the center, killing all 4 arms at the same time, skipping the other phases and all of the boss's invincibility. This precedes pressing a button, which ends the level. After deactivating the Spire, it turns out there's a whole lot more of them, so the gang decides that they're going to try to stop it at the source. Turning it off causes the building to fall, and Chief needs an evac. He hits the sickest landing of all time, but the bird is shot down by some anti-aircraft guns. Echo 216 is pissed and just wants to go home, but Chief insists that they have to stop the Banish here, or there won't be a home to go back to. Thus starts one of the sickest levels in all of Halo speedrunning, Pelican Down. Pelican Down has 3 anti-aircraft guns that need to be blown up. Once all 3 are destroyed, then a double boss battle occurs at the center of the level. After defeating the Mario Brothers, the level comes to a close. You can do the anti-aircraft guns in any order that you want. In the speedrun, Dice will go for the one at the top of the hill and eye shot first. This is the first real time you get to see just how fast you can go with the duelist sword and some slide jumps. It's one thing to see it in an interior level, but in an open world, it is wild. Dice climbs the mountain with the grapple and then jumps right into the AA gun where the banished leader confronts you via hologram. Dice skips the cutscene though, so Master Chief has no idea what's going on. Now the goal is to get to the next anti-aircraft gun as fast as possible. A coil redirect is the fastest way to go. So after clearing some enemies out, Dice takes a fusion coil and sets it up against this shack with a slanted roof. With good timing, he can send himself flying 1,000,000 miles an hour into the distance. With good timing, he can send himself flying 1,000,000 miles an hour into the distance.
The banished are mobilizing in a big way. Clock's ticking.
With good timing, he can send himself flying 1,000,000 miles an hour into the distance. Well, I guess this is a good time to talk about Halo Infinite's new tools. For those who don't know, speedrunners often have tools at their disposal to help with practicing and routing strategies. These tools are essentially third-party mods that allow for a variety of different functions. Hotkeys to spawn in items or enemies, teleportation, or even God mode, things of that nature. Alongside the ability to now play on down patch, a few members of the community have built out some pretty extensive mod tools. These help with practicing quite a bit. Alongside the usual tools like an auto splitter and load remover plugin for the timer, Halo Infinite also has a save manager that allows for the manipulation of save files and transferring them from player to player, vastly reducing the amount of time required to practice efficiently. Normally, Halo Infinite has only 4 save slots and you can't replay levels, so there's no way to boot up a specific mission to do it for practice in between runs, at least without this tool, or messing with some files yourself. Double Helix also built a fully functional Halo Infinite toolkit that allows for things like fast forwarding through unskippable cutscenes, spawning in weapons and items, and allowing for New Game Plus. Most notably here, though, the ability to revert checkpoint. Normally these tools are strictly for practice and not to be used in actual speedruns, but reverting checkpoint is a feature that is so integral to the Halo experience that many believe that it's a legit oversight and failure of development that it's not in the game. For those who don't know other Halo titles, and in Infinite, you occasionally will get these checkpoints. When you die, you will respawn with the world as it was whenever the checkpoint was saved. This can also be accomplished by pausing the game and simply hitting return to checkpoint. Well, at least in the other games. This is a great tool to get you unstuck when things go wrong. Sometimes the game is just jank and will lock up on you. An enemy will get stuck inside a wall, or a trigger just won't activate. Or you'll simply get lost and don't remember how to get back to where you once were. This is where reverting checkpoint comes in clutch. Halo Infinite has checkpoints, but they simply never added the ability to revert to them through the menu. This tool restores this ability. That's what you're seeing here when DICE gets this small loading screen and reverts back to his previous position. Nothing has been changed about how you acquire checkpoints though. Every checkpoint has gotten completely naturally in this run, but normally he wouldn't be able to manually revert to one of them without using the tool. The Halo Infinite speedrunning community decided that for the quality of life of the game, they would allow for the use of the tool in official speedruns, but only to revert checkpoints. This comes in super clutch on Pelican Down because quite frankly, this level's kind of broken. Once DICE finally gets a good coil launch, this is when you're going to see Thruster pay for itself. Thruster helps solve the problem of terminal velocity. You may know terminal velocity from real life, and it's kind of similar. In real life, terminal velocity is the maximum speed an object can reach when falling to the earth. Terminal velocity in Halo Infinite, though, is a bit different. Once you get going a certain speed, the game basically just gives up on trying to slow you down. Once at this speed, you'll fly infinitely in the direction you're moving without ever losing speed. The only way to stop is to hit a wall, or spam crouch until you slow down, or alternatively, to thruster. This is called terminal velocity, and these redirect coil launches get you up to that speed easily. But unlike real life, terminal velocity is not the top speed. You can go faster. Much faster, in fact, than the speed that you need to get up to terminal velocity. This coil launch, if done correctly, can send the player flying way faster than terminal velocity. So fast, in fact, that you can break the game and soft lock doing it. The last two anti-aircraft turrets need to let you inside the building and then allow you to press a button in order to open a hatch that you shoot to blow up the turret. But the game has many checks and triggers on the way to the tower. When you get a certain distance away, it starts to trigger these events in order. But these triggers only check for the player so often. If you're fast enough, you can actually close the gap from one side of the trigger to the other side in a small amount of time between checks. If this happens, you're soft locked and you have to quit to the main menu and reload to fix the triggers. It's essentially completely random if the triggers just so happen to catch you as you fly through them. If they catch you, then everything will work as intended. Because of this, you need to make sure you get some pretty particular launches. Just landing at the tower is not good enough. Reverting checkpoint helps with this a ton, as well as an issue that'll happen even if you hit all the triggers. Instead of getting into the anti-aircraft guns normally by powering up the grav lift at the bottom, you just clip through the ceiling. But these clips are reliant on Master Chief's legs being aligned correctly. When doing a launch of this speed across the map like this and using the tank gun and thruster, sometimes Master Chief's legs will be what's called broken. This means that the hitbox on your legs is aligned in a weird way that isn't normal. Reverting checkpoint will fix this issue, allowing you to then clip through the floor. You get a natural checkpoint when you land at each new anti-aircraft gun, which is perfect because you can just reload the checkpoint and make sure your legs aren't going to be broken. Thus, the clip to the roof will work every time. DICE then uses the thruster to be able to redirect the angle of the coil launch in reducing his speed just a little bit. Because he's able to do this, he is able to land exactly on top of the anti-aircraft gun after the launch, giving him a perfect checkpoint and being right where he needs to go so he can clip to the roof. Once he's inside, he presses the button to activate a cutscene that he doesn't watch and then blows it up from the inside, making sure to keep his fusion coils so he can do another launch to the last AA gun. He repeats the process once more and then does a coil launch to land in the center of Pelican Down where he waits for the bosses to spawn. He's there so fast that he can literally see them spawn in. Taurus in particular here has about 12 million years of invincibility frames, so DICE has to actually wait for him to be vulnerable before destroying him. A few quick tank gun shots and the Mario brothers are going back to plumbing. DICE then flies into the back of the Pelican where Chief and Echo 216 are reunited and have a touching moment where Fernando reveals he isn't actually a pilot. He just stole the Pelican and ran away with it. Arriving at the next level, DICE spawns in sitting in front of the Pelican. This is his only chance for a while to explore the rest of this island. When he gets pinned to the back of the Pelican, he'll be moved to the last and final island before the road. This is one of the largest of the lots, so there's going to be a lot of traversal. But instead of taking the Pelican, DICE restarts the mission. This reverts his equipment to the last checkpoint he had, which is just before he fought the bosses of Pelican Down. This gives him a fusion coil at the start of the next mission. I bet you can guess what he's gonna do with that. Yeah, a fusion coil launch. At this part of the story, Fernando and Chief are going around trying to take down a sequence of 4 towers that are stopping him from entering the Command Spire. Once they gain access, in theory, Chief should be able to stop the banished plans to restore the ring by shutting down the repair process. We start off at the Command Spire entrance, but there are some banished here that are going to try to kill us. We can't fast travel while in combat, so Dice coil launches straight up so that he could despawn all of the enemies and be able to fast travel to FOB Golf. He's doing this so that he can call in a drop so that he can get another Pelican that he's going to use to fly around the rest of the level. Of course, after a few quitouts. This level's sequence of towers are spread across the largest environment in the entire game, but with the Pelican, you can close the distance very quickly. I didn't explain it properly before, but the Pelican can be flown even faster than it would be normally, by doing a bit of extra speed tech. On a keyboard, you can fly in a perfect 45-degree angle, which is quite fast, but it's even faster to switch to a controller for this flying, and get a really specific angle with the analog stick. It's mostly straight, but a bit to the left or right. This causes the Pelican to get confused and give you both the forward and sideways momentum at the same time, instead of just one or the other. This will keep stacking until you hit the maximum speed of the Pelican, which is much faster than normal flying speed, or even 45-degree angle speed. Using this, Dice flies over to the first tower, where he has to kill all of the enemies before he can be allowed inside. On the way in, he makes sure to park right where the fast travel location for this area is. That way, he can just fast travel back here and grab the Pelican quickly after the tower is cleared. The section is on a timer though. There's a second wave of reinforcements that are going to come in, and he has to kill those as well. Dice spends his time killing the initial enemies until the first wave comes in. Then he focuses fire on the Phantom dropship, which when it explodes creates a flashbang that could win you long A all by itself. After this, he grabs a Spartan core while he waits for a second wave and sets up so he knows exactly where to shoot for the next Phantom.
Gotta get that Macca's.
While waiting for it to spawn, he upgrades his shields to make the next fight safer. He takes it out in 2 shots, and it's important that these shots are aimed well because if anyone survives the explosion, which the 2 gun turret grunts often do, they'll have to be killed before he can progress.
Let's see what's inside.
After venturing down and pressing the button, Dice returns to the Pelican by fast traveling to it, then uses it to fly to the next tower.
Ice cream.
Another beacon, another part of the sequence.
He lands a bit outside the area though by this Warthog. This will be important for future fast travel. He has to once again clear out all of the enemies before he can progress. The combat here is much trickier though, as it's not on a timer, and believe it or not, the tank gun isn't always the best gun for the job. But if he drops it, he'll never be able to get it back, and that's just not worth it. He also wants the sword for the increased movement speed, so both of his weapons are pretty bad for this type of fight. The skimmers especially are not close to the ground and often do not group up. Alternating between ground pounds and tank gun shots, he eventually kills all of the enemies and ventures once again under the ground to press the button.
This open. All threats neutralized.
Then he fast travels to the point roughly where he landed the Pelican.
There's a beacon nearby. We should check it out.
Group up. Thank you.
Now he flies to the third tower where he needs to kill a few more enemies and then ground pound clips to the floor so he can grab the button faster.
There we go.
An intact map. Holy crap. We're on gold face.
Are you two okay?
I parked the Pelican correctly.
What happened in there?
I don't know.
We're on
Something
golder
scanned me.
pace.
Something?
Probably fine.
Probably.
Or not.
For the last tower, he flies there with the Pelican as usual, but instead of landing it, he does something different. The Pelican with the analog shifting movement is actually moving so fast that if you jump out at top speed, you have terminal velocity. So on his way to the last tower, he just jumps out and flies at the tower, raining hell from above like a War Thunder Forum member.
Coming up on the last beacon.
Once arrived, he stops himself by thrusting in the opposite direction. This helps him to clear the last group of enemies quickly, then he presses the final button.
We did it. We actually did it. Not that I thought we wouldn't. It's nothing.
Once completed, he fast travels to the start of the mission where he skips a huge group of enemies by ground pound clipping into the room where he then presses the button starting the next level, Nexus. You might be thinking, well, can't he just press this button right away? And unfortunately, no. This button does nothing until all of the other towers are activated. Once inside, we arrive at one of the more innocuous levels in the speedrun, Nexus. You may have started to notice that pretty much all of the interior levels look the same. That's true, but it doesn't always equate to them playing the same in the speedrun. Nexus, for example, is done almost entirely inbound simply because it's faster. Less sharp turns and more open areas make sliding and jumping inbounds faster than getting out of bounds and avoiding BSP barriers. On top of that, almost no combat is required even inbounds, so movement is key here.
That's nice.
Look at that. The hologram, it looks like the spire above us. We're heading in the right direction.
Ow.
Must be completed. You will go no further.
Now in this hour of waking, when the rouse is still, a new day is waking, and the night is gone.
Stubbing my toe.
Once we finally do go out of bounds, we do it in a slightly different way than normal. Instead of just standing still and ground pound clipping, Dice swings around a corner and ground pound clips like this. This allows him to clip through the corner of a door he would normally not be able to while standing still. It's not entirely known why this works, but it's believed that the extra momentum built up by the swinging of the grapple hook helps push you further inside the collision and thus gets you out of bounds easier. That, combined with the destination of the pound being behind the collision, also giving you a bit more speed and depth into the geometry. This method was actually discovered by trying to find a way to replicate ground pound clips on the current patch, which actually does work in a few spots. The next room has the only kill quota in the entire level, these two hunters. As you know, killing hunters isn't very slow with the tank gun. You go out of bounds mostly to skip waiting for the door to open after you kill them. The next section is very Halo 2-esque. It opens up into a hole in the ground where you have to fall and slide through a tunnel. You can fall just alongside this out of bounds to avoid any BSP barriers. The real reason we go out of bounds is so that you can get back inbound somewhere we're not supposed to. This long-ass hallway is mostly for decoration, but by landing on this roof, you can find a hole in the geometry and just walk back in bounds. Well, walk is a strong word because there is no floor. If you fall, you're gonna die. Dice just Spider-Mans his way through the hallway and eventually ends up at this light bridge. He skipped way too much of the level though, and it won't load correctly, so he has to backtrack a bit by going in the wrong direction to hit a load trigger that loads in the rest of the level correctly. Once the level is hunky-dory, he jumps back across the gap and triggers a cutscene. After it's over, he has to collect 3 power seeds to activate the gravity lift that takes him to the Command Spire. This first door is fastest to get through by ground pound clipping out of bounds, as the weapon takes forever to open the damn door. The other 2 are done normally though. Once he has all 3 in place, Dice quits to the main menu and reloads back in. This skips some dialogue that stopped him from activating the gravity lift until it was over. It also teleports him backwards a room where he can quickly grab a hard light coil. He sets this coil up against the back of the button and then activates it. This will eventually trigger the gravity lift, but it's much faster to fly up the elevator shaft with a coil launch. Even though Dice completely skipped the gravity lift, Command Spire starts in one. It promptly shuts off as the Banisher trying to stop Chief from progressing into the Command Spire further. Thankfully, Dice gives no fucks about grav lists and never did, so he just grapple hooks onto the pillar in the ceiling and ground pound clips his way through it. This skips a lot of waiting and a forced fight with a few sentinels. Once in the ceiling, Dice finds a new piece of collision to get himself out of the ceiling and onto the roof of the level, where you can see the majority of the level is above him. He climbs through the ceiling once more to land on another roof and yet another floor, where he eventually can get to where he's trying to go. The center pillar here is the only area where the BSP load connects to the room above, so he has to go to the center.
What did I touch with my toes?
Once there, he gets Spider-Man all the way to this door that he uses to clip back in bounds. Once in bounds, he heads to a teleporter, which seems to take him to yet another set of rooms that look exactly the same. Getting out of bounds once more with the ground pound, Dice can see the whole world as the rest of the level here is above him as well. Scaling this is quite simple for Dice. Oh, and fun fact, this is where the Mythic Skull is. The only reason I know that is because that's where I had to go back in bounds way back in the day. Thankfully, Dice found a much faster strategy.
A little lost, huh?
And yes, Weapon, he does know where he's going.
How did I do that? That was...
At the last teleporter, Dice has a trick called a tele-yeet. By ground pounding into the teleporter, he gets a huge boost of speed where he comes out the other side, skipping the entire room. Yeet! Now we fight this Spire's monitor, and yes, it's the exact same boss fight.
Something is being built. Rebuilt.
What is it?
Something.
Oh, him again.
After Dice blows out its boy hole, he rides the elevator to the top of the Command Spire. He then just has to clear a room full of enemies and press a button that calls for reinforcements.
We made it. And it looks like we aren't the only ones. I just heard
Please tell me that was everything.
3 Phantoms arrive to fight, but they're not exactly expecting a tank gun, and flashbang us to try and escape. You might have noticed that Dice actually used the energy sword here, and that's because this room is the only room in the entire game that has a power weapon refuel station. That means he's actually able to replenish his energy sword ammo here. This is when Fernando is then captured and taken somewhere called the House of Reckoning by the banished leader Escharum, and Chief is so pissed that he decides it's time to go back and get him. The weapon opens a portal as close as she can to Fernando's location, and Chief jumps in it.
Mistakes.
They arrive at the repository, and it would be remiss of me not to make a suppository joke here. After all, we are at the tail end of the speedrun. This part of the run is a good mix of both inbounds and out of bounds movement, the first half showcasing just how far some of these slide jumps can go with the duelist sword.
Okay.
Look, that terminal should give us what we
Lovely.
need.
Eventually, we come up to this huge gap jump where Dice just barely makes it by using his thruster charges. He then takes a hard left and ground pound clips into the floor by using this door. This puts him under the map where he can progress past a locked door, loading into the next part of the level. Dice has to be really careful here, as the BSP barrier is right up against the wall that he's grappling. Once he's on top, if he walks through some textures that don't have geometry, he can clip back in bounds, where he runs past a bunch of terrifying grunts. And really, who wouldn't be terrified seeing the Master Chief literally punch his way through a wall?
We will cleanse the ring of human.
Yeah, I really like that movement now. Even though I'm not sliding, I'm still rounding the corners so much cleaner.
The next few rooms are just some well-optimized movement that stops at an elevator. At this point, using it normally is practically blasphemous. But we have to, or the level won't progress later on. The next few rooms are all about powering up another elevator that we literally don't need to use, but if you don't power it up, the level won't end, so we have to anyways.
There's another lift nearby. It'll take us close to the surface.
This requires 2 power seeds to be taken into this main room. Before we get there though, Dice is going to force his way through the floor and head right to the first seed, guarded by a few enemies that are quickly disintegrated by the tank gun and a punch or two.
Looks like we're trapped in here. Or maybe not.
Once he gets his seed, he tele-yeets and redirects off of a box to keep some of his speed around the corner. Then he yeets his seed into the hallway where he'll pick it up later. This room happens to be right above the other seed room, so he can once again punch his way through the wall and subsequent ceiling to get to the other seed. He then tele-yeets back and then juggles the seeds onto the elevator.
There's the lift. And it's not powered up. The Banished are trying to trap us in. Not enough power. Wait, is that Earth?
It's kind of nice.
What's it doing here?
No major mistakes.
Once up the elevator that we totally didn't need, Dice quits to the main menu and reloads the game.
Super satisfying.
This is because he didn't kill every enemy in the elevator room, and if you kill all of the enemies in the seed rooms but not the elevator room, for some reason you could soft lock here sometimes.
When I should be
Quitting to the main menu and loading back in fixes this problem. Now Dice is right near the end of the level. All he has to do is clip under the map one more time through this door, and then jump to the end of the level. Dice finally arrives at the road. You know, that level that any percent gets to just 16 minutes in? Told you that trick skipped way too much of the game. Anyways, this is the last overworld level of the game, even though it doesn't feel like much of one at the start. Dice instantly backs into the door that he came from and then clips through the ground. He thrusters as far as he can so that he can die as fast as possible. This is because where he respawns is much closer to where he needs to go than where he starts, and it's faster to die than it is to run there. The road is a simple level. You're on one side of the road and need to get to the other. Classic Master Chief in the books moment. There are plenty of wild strategies that you could go for here. There's a chopper launch, some coil redirects, and even a lunge warp. But Dice is about 50 minutes into this hour-long speedrun, so he's not going to risk it. He takes the Warthog and drives it about halfway to the House of Reckoning. This is where he gets out and sees a ghost. The ghost is faster than the Warthog and can be used for a skip up ahead. This barricade blocks the way to progress, but this Wraith is empty and parked right next to it. Normally you're supposed to go lower the barricade, but that's slow, and Master Chief from the books is present during every Halo speedrun. Dice ramps off the Wraith and flies over the barricade with the help of some hunters. Then he races all the way to the House of Reckoning and heads inside.
Yeah, you saw that? To be fair, I never have to drive over that rock. That double hunter boost put me way far left.
The House of Reckoning is definitely a speedrunner's worst nightmare at first glance. It's a series of boxy rooms that have long, drawn-out wave fights that the player must beat before progressing. Not only that, but the triggers in this level are very precise. If you do any of them even slightly out of order, or trigger the wrong one too early, then the whole level breaks and your only recourse is to restart the entire mission. You would think that the level would just be a bunch of standing around shooting things with the tank gun. Turns out though, it's anything but. Dice runs across the first battle arena and instantly clips to the wall. This gets him right where you'd want to be after the first combat clear is over. He has to wait here until a certain point though. He can't leave this location until this alarm starts ringing. This gives him survive basic training as an objective. From there, he climbs the elevator on the outside and waits for an alarm to end. Then he moves forward, completing the objective to leave basic training facility. Then, on a tight timer, he grapples around this next arena, being sure to land on this side room for just a moment. This gives him the objective of complete advanced training.
I think that's it. We should keep moving.
Wow. It's almost like practicing makes me faster.
Heading into the same spot he did in the first room, Dice gets here just in time to skip some dialogue and completes advanced training. This fixes all the triggers for the rest of the level, meaning there is no possibility of a soft lock. He clips back in bounds and goes to the first of two boss fights, Jega, the Blade Master, with the badass red energy sword. Who dies before Escharum can even finish gassing him up. This is why he chose you, I guess. Once the Halo Reach objective finishes, Dice quits out to the main menu and loads back in to teleport himself close to the exit. He then climbs the elevator shaft because it's faster, and then arrives where Fernando is being held. However, Escharum is there to hard counter. This boss fight is big slow, or at least it was if you fight him normally. Escharum has a ton of damage gates that don't allow you to do more than a certain amount of damage at a time. After each threshold is met, he becomes invincible for an extended period. So even with the tank gun, this fight takes forever. Instead, we're just gonna choose to leave. Dice clips back through the elevator and runs really far away. So far away, in fact, that the boss, yeah, you guessed it, he despawns. This counts in the game's code as killing him, and the level is essentially over. Saving and quitting brings Dice back before Jega, but it progresses him to the next mission, Silent Auditorium, which he is supposed to get to by the cutscene where Fernando takes him there. But we never actually save Fernando. He's still stuck in that torture chamber. Dice gives no fucks, however, and restarts the mission, teleporting himself there. As far as the story is concerned, with the leader of the Banished dead, all that leaves is his collaborator, the Harbinger. She is up to something at the Silent Auditorium, and Chief wants to stop her. Jumping out of the Pelican, Dice heads right for the opposite side of the room. It's chaos in here. So many aliens, all with random pathing. Once he gets to the other side, he does another one of those crazy slinging ground pounds in the corner of the door to get through it. Once out of bounds, he climbs to the roof of the next building and slides off of it into this large boy. This big boy is something that he has to go around, but the BSP loading zone is pretty tight to the model here, so he can't cut any corners. He then drops down onto the door frame where he will then clip back and bounds. This is because the next room door has a super tight BSP load zone. He literally can't traverse across it out of bounds at all. That means his only option is to go through it inbounds. Unfortunately, this room is on a kill counter for 2 powered up hunters that take a few tank shots to kill each. And even more unfortunate is that DICE has skipped the trigger for them to spawn, so he won't even get the option to kill them. He has a plan for this, and it's to make use of the hard light coil by grappling it and then dropping it on his head to push him through the door. This trick is quite inconsistent, and DICE messes it up a few times in this run.
Okay. Higher, I guess?
Once through though, he's off again to the races, running through the level at Mach 10, simply outpacing anything that's in his way.
I really don't care. If you could tell me how much time I actually lost there, I might care, but you could also just tell me how much time I lost on Pelican Down, and then I would go back to not caring.
When he finally arrives at something that could stop him, it's a light bridge, and it's not even the light bridge itself that stops him. No, he can easily clear the gap, it's the door after. It's tied to a small cutscene that DICE is skipping by not activating the bridge. It's faster to just punch his way out of bounds and get to the roof to bypass the door. A few more rooms later and DICE gets back inbound so his movement can be faster again.
Okay, sure, go ahead. I was gonna watch it afterwards, but if you clipped it. 20 to 21. Is that RTA or IG?
This keeps up until he gets a shock coil that's going to be super useful for an upcoming elevator. Normally, the monitor of this installation would meet up with Chief and they'd have a big long conversation where Chief convinces him to let him pass. But instead, we take our friendly shock coil and leave without ever paying child support. Clipping back in bounds, we arrive at the elevator where obviously we're going to do a coil launch instead of riding it. The type of coil for this trick actually matters a lot. DICE wants to use a shock coil because they have a much wider surface area, making it possible to throw them in a way that they land standing upright. By looking at Chief's breathing animation and switching weapons from the coil at its peak of the animation, DICE can guarantee that the coil will land standing up, making it possible to coil launch without even using a wall, making the trick way safer. This is also way faster and much cooler than using the elevator. Unfortunately, the door at the top won't open unless there's an elevator there, but of course we have a way around this. DICE hugs the door and does a precise lineup to hard coil pinch through the door, sending him flying towards the next one. This one opens normally and leads him into the room where the Harbinger is. Then he just has to press a button to start the final boss. Anyways, DICE is going to take on this multi-wave fight by standing in very specific spots to manipulate where the enemies are going to spawn. Just like the other bosses, the Harbinger is weak for a brief time and then becomes invincible until a certain condition is met. In this fight, the condition is all of the additional enemies need to be killed. By using the tank gun on the doors that the enemies enter through as they do, DICE can kill most of them instantly. Then a few that are left are cleaned up shortly after. He then shoots the Harbinger twice to move on to the next phase. Because there is no upside to having faster movement in this room, DICE finally gets rid of the duelist sword and grabs a commando, because he can use it to get headshots on some enemies that might survive the tank gun, speeding up the end fight just a bit more. After 2 more cycles, the Harbinger is dead, and Halo Infinite is completed in 59 minutes and 14 seconds. The sub-hour barrier in a speedrun is one of the most important accomplishments in any game. And for Halo Infinite, it was hit in just a few days of the game's releasing. But with that version of the speedrun ostensibly dead and gone, the community has once again broken this milestone. Now, with a completely different category that is much more fun, and with a game that is much more playable. Oftentimes, these barriers spell a period of inactivity, as the mighty accomplishment stands as a towering achievement that intimidates many from trying to top it. But in Halo Infinite's case, it seems to be only just the beginning. This run was the world record as of August 13th, 2024, and it was the first ever sub 1 hour all mission speedrun. Just before on the 9th, Alice had set a new world record of a 1:01:21. DICE had then improved upon it once with a 1 hour and 46 second time, and then this run being the first to beat it under an hour. Since then, Cryphon has gotten the second sub 1 with the 59:51 on August 17th. The record was then improved upon by Nails down to a 58:41 just 1 day later, making him the third person to ever get a sub 1 hour speedrun. Since then, Nails has improved the world record down to a 55:53, and even has improved the All Missions Legendary run to be under 1 hour as well. In just the span of 1 week, 3 people have now broken the 1 hour barrier. With resources just getting more and more plentiful and the game's quality of life increasing day by day, it seems like Halo Infinite's speedrunning community has come back from the grave. There are more runners checking out the game now than have in the past few years combined. Co-op has officially launched and is being routed out for speedruns, and the competition is starting to heat up. I, for one, am very grateful to DICE, Burnt, and Double Helix, as well as many of the others who have helped to breathe life back into this once dead game. And I think it just goes to show, no matter what happens, what glitches are patched, what metas are getting stale, or if the game is just broken, if there's enough love and dedication put in, speedrunners can do anything. Thanks so much for watching, and stay stylish.